How's it going, everybody? This is Rusty here at FCP Aero, and today I'm going to show you guys how to replace your rear wheel bearings on the G01 X3 M40i. Now on the table in front of me, you can see we've already gone ahead and replaced the driver's side wheel bearing. This DIY, we're going to be focusing on the passenger side, but don't be confused, it is the same side on either side of the vehicle, and with most suspension components, it is recommended to do these in pairs. Whether you're doing springs, struts, control arms, it is suggested to do them in pairs. As one bearing begins to wear, the other one's probably not far behind, so that is why we pair these in a kit together. That said, included in this kit is going to be the caliper hardware along with the wheel bearing hardware to get it secured into the housing, and then the central axle bolt as well. Some things to keep in mind: there's not exactly a direct service interval for wheel bearings. It is more of a replace when worn type of situation, but some symptoms you may be experiencing could be a groaning sound on the highway. You could have some looseness in the suspension when checking the wheels with the vehicle in the air, or even a worst case scenario, you could have an ABS and traction control light on the dash due to a worn ring and or an ABS sensor that could be failing. Now that we've gone over everything on the table, let's talk about some of the tools we're going to need to take care of the job. Now, for starters, 1/2-inch impact gun is going to make your life a lot easier. You'll see throughout, I'm using it for breaking bolts free, starting things back up. There's a lot of high torque hardware in this job, so if you don't have one, I highly suggest having a 1/2-inch impact gun. Something substantial will definitely do. With that, you're going to need a 1/2-inch torque wrench, a large 1/2-inch breaker bar. You'll see that I'm going between a 1/2-inch as well as a 3/8 torque wrench, because you're going to need something that goes down all the way to 3 Newton meters, 16 Newton meters, all the way up well above 200 Newton meters. Additionally, we have a ratchet, a couple of 1/2-inch extensions, a 1/2-inch universal joint, 17 millimeter for removing the wheels, a 3/8 to 1/2-inch adapter, as well as an 8 millimeter socket, a 13 millimeter socket, an external Torx 16 millimeter socket, 6 millimeter Allen, a 17 millimeter Allen, and then we spoke about the interesting bolts that hold the wheel hub into the carrier. Those are a TP60, and along with the universal joint and 1/2-inch extension, you may find that we'll be switching between those two pieces. It's definitely going to be helpful to have a or a couple of flashlights to make sure you can see everything, a hammer for releasing the rotor, as well as a pry bar, and then additionally a caliper hanger, a small pocket screwdriver, a wheel hanger, a 13 millimeter and a 17 millimeter wrench. And you'll notice if you are removing the caliper, which we don't in this video, the 17 millimeter wrench does have a little bit shaved off of it to fit into the brake pins, which we'll go over in our brake video if you're interested in the rear brake replacement. But that pretty much takes care of the tools that we'll need to take care of the job. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the wheel with a 17 millimeter lug, as well as our wheel lock key. If you do have one, hopefully it's located in the trunk for you. And you'll notice we do have brand new rear brakes. We just got done doing a DIY on those, so if you're interested, be sure to check that out as well. In doing the rear bearing, we do have to remove these rear brakes. We are going to try to keep the caliper together with the carrier and pads all assembled to make sure that that does not cause any introduction of one-time use hardware, as the caliper carrier pins are one-time use. So I will be removing the ones from the hub. However, you may find it a little bit easier at home to go ahead and remove the caliper, release the pads, and the carrier all separately. So, as I said, we're going to go ahead and remove the caliper with the pads all together. And because there's not exactly much clearance with the caliper on, I'm going to be using a 13 millimeter spline drive ratchet wrench. We've got those cracked free, but we do want to make sure that we get our brake pad wear indicator loosened up so that we don't stretch that wire. That does come up along the subframe to this box here. So we are just going to pop this out, and if it's giving you some difficulty, you could certainly use a little pocket screwdriver or a pick on these little clips here. Go ahead and pull the connector out, pressing on the connector out here and releasing together. And on the inside here, there is one, it's a brand new sensors. Get that down and out of your way. And then there is one more spot down here where it's also held in. All right, we can hang that out of our way, and we'll continue to release these external Torx bolts in the caliper. All right, then with a caliper hanger, we can go ahead And we'll let this sit off to the side. All right, and now we're gonna go ahead and release this rotor. We did just have these rear brakes installed, so I'm fairly certain that this is not gonna fight us. However, there's a definite possibility that this 6mm may be seized into the rear brakes of your vehicle. So if that's the case and your impact gun or ratchet isn't releasing that, you may wanna put 2 lug bolts in here, putting a pry bar in here to counter hold the wheel from spinning, and then using a 6mm on a ratchet to break that free. However, if it's torqued to the proper 16 Newton meters, you can usually release it just like that. One more thing to keep in mind, if you're doing your rear bearings, you may want to consider replacing your rear brakes at that same time. You may not have as easy of a time getting these rotors off as we are, as we just had these off, and you may find yourself having to release them by smacking them with a hammer and getting that to come off. So at that time, you may put a nice indent in your rotor, creating some noise, and it's just a time to think about replacing your rear brakes, pads, and rotors while you're doing your rear bearings. All right, we got the rotor off. Now we need to get the center axle bolt out before moving on to the actual bolts that hold the hub bearing into the knuckle. And if you don't have an impact gun available, you are just using hand tools, you may want to take a step back, and at the beginning of this video, you'll have to reinstall your wheel with the center cap out, breaking this free with the vehicle still on the ground, which is how we're going to be tightening that up. So we'll go over that again later on. But if you do have an impact gun, 17mm Allen will break free this 210 Newton meter torque spec. And once that's removed, we are going to move on to the backside here and releasing the 4 bolts that hold that hub inside of there. If your vehicle is experiencing some rust, or it's maybe a few years older than ours, you may want to take a second to put a little bit of penetrating oil on the ends of the threads to make removal a little bit easier. However, we've already done the other side and everything came apart quite easily. So we're gonna get the vehicle up in the air a little bit, giving us a little bit more leverage, and start breaking free all of those hub bolts. All right, now that we've got the car up in the air, we do want to just release this little aero shield here before moving forward and getting to the hub bearings. This is gonna give us a lot more clearance in order to swing our ratchet and break those bolts free. With 2 8mm underneath, release those, and then you're going to slide the shield out of the way towards the outside of the car, and then pulling down here, releasing these little clips here. Set that off to the side, and now we've got much more room underneath in order to gain access to at least 3 of those hub bolts. All right, so as we discussed earlier in the tool section of this video, there are some specific tools you're going to need to release the bolts for the hub bearing. There are varying lengths, which we will be probably jumping between these 2 and using them like extensions, if you will, to make sure that we have enough clearance for removing these bolts and making sure that they do not twist, bind, what have you. I've also got a extension with a swivel that will probably make at least one of these bolts a little bit more accessible without having to remove that strut. You'll see what I mean in a second here, but it is advised to have both lengths of these sockets here, as it will make your life a lot easier on this rear bearing. So with a 1/2-inch ratchet, I'm going to start with the longer shank TP60. And you may have to just compress the axle slightly just to get it out of your way a little bit. And then I'm going to start on the one right here, releasing this one, going around and cracking all 4 free before making sure I can get them all out. So that one's loose. You really want to make sure that that bit is secured inside of the bolts, as they are rather shallow. If there's dirt and sand and things like that in there, you may want to take a second to brake clean that out. All right, so I'm going to try to get through the top here and release this topmost bolt. And I've been able to get through to most of them using that long one. I have a feeling I'm going to have to use the shorter one on that last bolt. Breaking these free is going to be a lot easier than torquing them. The torque sequence for these is quite interesting. All right, 3 of them are loose, and this last one is going to be fun. So with the shorter shank, a universal joint, and about a 3-inch extension, and compress the axle a little bit and push it towards the front of the car. And I can't really see the bolt, but I swear it's there. I'm going to go around the axle in front of the strut. Make sure that you have this firmly seated especially with the universal joint in play here. It's introducing a little bit of room to fail or slip out, causing the bolt to strip. So you really want to make sure that it's firmly seated in there. And now we've got them all loose. All right, now that we've got most of the bolts out, we still have one holding it in, and I'm just going to release that by hand. Your vehicle may not have a bearing that is so easily removed as this one. If it's stuck or seized in there, you may need to use a hammer to release it from the hub if it's rusted in place around this flange. You may even need a slide hammer to bolt onto here and pull it out. Another couple of tricks I've done before. Let me get one of these bolts here. If it is stuck in, you can leave the bolts inside the hub and using either an air hammer or a punch, driving the bearing out with a couple of the bolts diagonally to walk it out of the hub if in fact it is stuck in and seized in there. But clean up this area and maybe even use a little bit of a Brillo pad to clean up that little rust spot and make sure that this is nice and clean to go back together with the new bearing. All right, we got everything cleaned up here. We did have the axle bolt in here so that we could nicely spray some brake clean in that area without getting any into the axle grease area. So definitely throw your axle bolt in there, make sure you don't get any debris or brake clean in there, and then use something that's not going to remove some of the metal surface, but at least clean up the seating surface so that there's no rust, no buildup, or anything like that. And obviously, if yours was stuck in there, you're gonna probably spend a lot more time and trying to get it to look like this. So keep that in mind depending on the condition of your car. But we're gonna proceed with reinstallation, and we've got our new wheel hub as well as 4 new wheel hub bolts. So we are gonna have to play around with the axle once we do get it fitted, as it does have that quite weird design. You're gonna wanna make sure you get these meshed together and that they don't stand on top of each other. And we'll explain that in a little bit later once we go to mate the axle after getting this bolted into the hub. So we can kind of pull this back a little bit to make sure that we can get that in there. And you'll notice that the pattern on the bolt pattern is a little bit closer here than it is up here on the actual hub going in there. So you can only install it one way. It will not bolt in this way. It will not line up. So make sure you have it orientated the correct way. And once you get it fitted and lined all up, just take the bolts and feed them in. And you may find it easier to use the bit to drive those in and get them all seated down. It is a little bit recessed, so it's hard to get your hand back in there. Now that we have all the pieces of hardware holding that hub in there in by hand, we're gonna go back and do all 4 to 20 Newton meters. Then we're gonna do all 4 to 140 Newton meters. Then you're gonna back all 4 of them off, no more than 45 degrees, back to a final 120 Newton meters. And then once we're done with that, we're gonna do a 90 degree on all 4. So pay close attention. It is gonna get a little confusing, but we'll get through it. All right, using the TP60 long bit, I'm gonna try to get a couple of these started, but I may have to use the shorter one with the extension as you saw upon removal. But we'll go through and get as many of these as we can down to 20 Newton meters. All right, and now that we've got all those snugged up to 20 Newton meters, we're gonna go around and do 140 Newton meters on all 4 again. All right, I'm just gonna take a marker and I'm gonna make a mark of a like 12 o'clock position and a 9 o'clock position because we're going backwards. And then I'm gonna try to end the bolt somewhere in the middle of that. I'm not really good at doing the 8th point, so I'm gonna just do the quarter there. All right. So you guys can't really see all of these because I'm putting them off to the left and you can't really see the mark. The bottom one I'm gonna mark at all 4, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock, so you can see the rotation of the bolt throughout this torque sequence. So I'm gonna start with this corner one here. You can definitely monitor how much you're moving it by how much the ratchet is turning as well, but you don't wanna go any more than about an 1/8 of a turn. It's right about there. And that's about an 1/8 of a turn. And if I recall doing it on the other side, this pretty much just brought it back to where it was at the 12 o'clock position. So again, I'm not sure what this does, but you guys can watch and see where this ends up. 120. All right. So now after we do all that, we then have to do a final 90 degree on everything. So with the tech angle torque wrench or something that measures degrees, it's definitely a little bit dicey on suspension because you're gonna be having all these bushings flex and everything. So the best course of action for putting a 90 degree on here is going after the marks on the bolts, just like we did for the backing off 45. So if you haven't already, we can do a 3 o'clock position as we already did the 9, or just finish off the mark on your bolt opposite of the 9 o'clock position that you did earlier. Whatever's gonna work for you best. We just need to do a final 90-degree turn on all 4 of these bolts. All right, now that I've collected my thoughts and regained the blood to my hands after doing it above my head, I imagine if you're doing this on your garage floor, you're gonna have quite a hard time getting that torque spec. So keep in mind that we are doing this on a 2-post lift, making it a lot easier than it would be on the garage floor. With that, we're gonna continue on and reinstall the axle bolt. You'll notice the center of the axle bolt is a little bit offset. You're gonna wanna take a hand behind and line up the splines of the axle with the bearing. So you may need to oscillate the bearing a little bit to kind of find where that's gonna sit, and you'll feel it engage. And then once it does, the center of the axle will actually find its own home. You can take your bolt with your 17mm Allen and get that started, keeping pressure on that, and the spring will hold that in place as well. And as you get close, grab the hub, play around with the hub, and it should move the axle at the same time. If not, it is not fully engaged. So keep that in mind as you're getting close. And then it's moving the axle. It feels like it's engaged the splines. Take a look behind. It should be somewhat flush. It shouldn't stick out too much. And then we're going to take that 17 and the impact gun. We're going to get it close to the torque spec. We're not obviously going to hit the 210 Newton meters. Then plus 90, we're going to get that done once we get down on the ground. This is just to snug it up once we've started to secure the axle bolt. Now we can go ahead and throw the rotor on there and start reassembling our rear brakes. So we are going to be installing a new rotor, so we're not too concerned about the surface on the rear, but if you're reusing your rotor, take a second. If you have a new bearing on there, you want a smooth contact surface in here to make sure that you don't disrupt anything, creating any pulsations or anything. You want to make sure you have a flat mating surface. So again, if you're using an old rotor, take a second to sand down here so that it sits flush on your new hub. And then we're going to use our 6mm Allen rotor screw, get that started in there. Then we're going to torque that to 16 Newton meters. And before we get the car down, we do want to put the cover back on depending on which side you were on. So we're just going to slide it into the outside of the control arm, catching that little notch, and then the bolt holes will line up if you caught that notch correctly. Torque spec for these is only 3 Newton meters, and we did put new plastic inserts in there with new control arms, so they are rather tightly threaded, but if you're using old ones, you're going to want to be a little bit careful, making sure that those don't shatter upon tightening them up, as they are only 3 Newton meters. All right, go ahead and grab your 2 new caliper bolts, and if you've separated the caliper from the carrier, just grab your carrier. But we did leave the brake pads and everything all connected, so we're just gonna reassemble like that, and we're gonna be torquing these E16 external Torx bolts to 130 Newton meters. Now, if you recall, we do have to run our brake pad sensor. Just go ahead and put the wiring back into the same provisions in which it was removed, and then we'll finalize it up in the box, making sure that we engage that connector as well. And once you get that connected, make sure you get the little dust boot lined up correctly. Make sure that we keep everything out of there that we can. Make sure everything is firmly engaged. Nothing's in a twisted formation or anything like that. Nothing's pinched. And then we're ready to go throw our wheel on. Now we're going to take a 17mm and just snug up these bolts. And now that we've got the car back down on the ground, we're going to go ahead and torque the center axle bolt to 210 Newton meters and then a final 90 degrees. And now we're going to go ahead and torque the wheel to 140 Newton meters. And with it being a new wheel hub, it wouldn't be a bad idea, once you've gotten back from your test drive, to just recheck that at the 140 Newton meters as well. Go ahead and install your center cap. And that pretty much wraps up today's DIY on the rear wheel bearings on the G01 X3 M40i. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, drop down in the comment section below. And don't forget to subscribe, because we'll have plenty more DIYs on this vehicle and many others like it. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.